Fantastic. We are hitting record. Welcome everyone to this special convened panel of Accounting Network leaders. We are in crazy times. My name is Rob Brown. I'm delighted to be your host today. I have a collection of the great and the good when it comes to accounting networks, and we're going to talk around this situation and what we're seeing happening from our perspective. And just to kick us off, I'm going to get everyone introducing themselves just to say some quick hellos so that you know who is on the panel today. Martin, can I start with you? A little brief introduction, what it is you're doing and your background.
Certainly, Rob. Thank you. Well, I'm Martin Bissett, the founder of the Bissett Group, which wholly or jointly owns 5 entities that serve the accounting profession. I've worked exclusively within the accounting profession for the last 22 years, and my great passion is getting the impossible done, which is inspiring the profession to bring financial literacy to SME clients, to reduce significantly the amount of businesses that we see go to the wall, run out of cash, run out of self-esteem, or have their troubles transferred to the home. So it's been a long old fight. It will continue to be a long old fight. But I am very grateful to be in the company of a number of respected professionals here. We clearly tick every diversity box in this group today. And I'm also grateful to know so many genuinely proactive accounting firms.
Yeah. And Martin, you've recently started your own network, haven't you? Your own community.
Yes. I think community is a better description of it than network. Yes. Not with any great criteria, as many of my colleagues have. No particular size boundary, no particular exclusivity boundary, far more a mindset, far more a way of thinking, a way of running the practice, a way of growing the team. So mine's a collection of all shapes and sizes of firms that have in common a lot of energy, a lot of desire to not only improve their own organizations, but to improve their clients as well in very demonstrable ways.
Terrific. James Hickey, welcome to the call. You've been in this game a long time, James.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and it's great to be on the call today. As some background, I've been in the sort of professional services marketplace for about 20 years now. I had the pleasure of working with James Mendelssohn many, many moons ago at MSI Global, then went on to Alliot Group, and then more recently with PKF International, sort of global network there. My background has very much been, I've never done a day's accounting. My background is more just trying to, along with what Martin has said, is just really empower accounting firms to look at the world slightly differently. I think you find a profession that is very good at benchmarking off one another, very good at talking about change, but when it actually comes to implementing change, it just takes time. And it's very few firms that are really getting it. And I think that is one of the really interesting things, and we'll obviously be talking about this a lot more today. If we had to take something away from what's happening today and on a positive, it's that it's really forcing firms to look very differently at how they work, how they operate, and how they really look to provide relevant services to their clients, and also are a relevant home for their talent. And all of these issues, I'm sure we'll be covering later on.
Yes, but nicely teed up, James. Thank you very much. Steve, welcome from Prime Global.
Thanks, Rob, and very happy to be part of the call as well. I am an accountant, so I've been in the profession for it's actually 30 years. I worked out before this call. It's my birthday today as well, so I'm feeling quite old. But I've had various roles, particularly in membership associations, and I have a real passion for the value of the accounting profession. So I was with ACCA as an executive director there, and had various other roles at the FRC in the UK as well, and now chief executive of Prime Global. But I do really passionately believe the profession has this critical role to drive economic growth and create opportunity, and we're needed more than ever before. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today to see how we can extend that value.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, the accounting networks, the associations, and the leaders in this firm it's a great time to step up, and we're going to be dipping into those topics. Derek, you've been doing this a long time as well, haven't you?
Yes, yeah. I was going to say, I think I'm the only accountant here, but Steve has beaten me to it. So I guess, like me, the pictures in his study are straight, because that's what accountants do, obviously. to go around and straighten all the pictures. But no, I qualified some time ago with what was then Cooper's. I became a senior manager there and then moved from there to what was Neville Russell, where I held the role of managing partner for about 10 years. So it took them into the Mazar merger to create what was then, and still is, I think, one of the largest international profit sharing organisations, as most of the big four aren't profit sharing. I became MD of Charter Group when we acquired it at the end of January. It's an alliance. It's not a network in that sense, in that we are not looking to do global work. They are, if you like, small to medium firms that enjoy working together. I remain passionate about the profession. I think the profession still has an enormous role to play. My own personal mantra is only work with people I like, doing things that I enjoy. So it's quite simple, and I enjoy what I do.
Yeah. My mother used to say to me, there are only 10 really horrible, nasty people in the world. The problem is that they move around a lot. So, but it is nice if you can just work with people you like. Speaking of which, I do like James Mendelssohn. We go back a ways. James, welcome. Just give us a bit of background about you.
Yeah, but it's very good to be here. It's good to see Derek, who I started working with, I think, 30 years ago, and James Hickey, who I started working with 20 years ago. So it's good to be here. My background, I'm currently a director of a new organization called Global Alliance Advisory Services. We're a consultancy which is focusing exclusively on working with networks and associations in both the accounting and legal sectors. And I think, as we will find out today, there is an awful lot going on, both some quite worrying things, and I think also some real opportunities. And one needs to always look on the positive side of this sort of situation. Going back, I'm actually a lawyer by training, but I never practiced. I did start accountancy at Deloitte's, but 6 weeks was probably 5 weeks too long, so I moved on from that pretty quickly. Since then, I spent 10 years heading up marketing teams in 2 national firms, neither of which still exist. One was Spicer and Pegler, which some of you may remember, and one was Neville Russell, where Derek was. More recently, I think I spent 18 years at MSI Global Alliance, first as CEO and the last 5 years as chairman. MSI is slightly unusual in that it encompasses both lawyers and accountants, which is an interesting combination. But that was a fun role. It was a worthwhile role. But I think, as James said, the challenge for some of the people running networks is to get professionals, predominantly accountants, thinking a little bit outside their narrow professional box. Because there's a lot more to do than just going over the books.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real challenge. And I think that today's environment is bringing that challenge to the fore more than it has ever been in the past. So difficult times, but I think exciting times too.
Certainly, and we're going to unpack some of that now. And as network leaders, as we are in various guises, we don't often have the chance to get together and speak into what's happening with the profession. We do find ourselves in a critical time where accountants are on the front line. They've been described as the health service for businesses. James Hickey, can I come to you first? How do you think the accounting world is coping generally with COVID-19 and everything that's happening right now?
I think it's a really interesting one. And I think if we just even if we could still remember those days before COVID, I think what was really interesting was that the accounting profession was actually coming out of quite a good period. And you know, certainly from the members of PKF, a lot of them were talking about having really good, strong first quarters of this year, which I think is going to obviously help them through this process. But I think that the difficulty with the accounting profession, and I think we've got to be careful here. Obviously, this is about the accounting profession, but I think it's also at networks as well. I think that this is going to be a real transformation. And I think one of the challenges you're finding is that accountants love the known and they love to know what's coming. And the difficulty is we're sat here and everybody is sat at home, not really, there are so many questions being asked of governments, of professional bodies. But the problem is no one knows the answers of what, not necessarily tomorrow, but next week is going to look like. So the uncertainty of the market is probably the key thing here. But on the positive side is that, and I mentioned this in my brief introduction, is what this current period has brought to the profession is actually all those questions being answered of saying, look, well, how do we deal with remote working? How can we deal with all of these things? Well, the fact is the profession has been pushed very quickly off the edge of a cliff into this environment. And you know what? It's coping, it's learning. And I think that is going to be almost one of the big challenges, is how do leaders embrace this new world? Because now the rabbit is out of the hat. It's going to be very hard to go back to almost impossible to go back to old practices when the real world comes back to us all.
Yeah, very good. Derek, James talks about double-digit growth. The accountants were having good times, aren't they? But we're not so sure about that anymore.
No, I think there will be a difficulty. I think the professional, there's always a bit of a time lag. I mean, having led a firm through nothing on the scale of today, but through a number of recessions and so on, there is something of a time lag between that and, if you like, the high street, normal high street. And I think the profession is quite well placed because the demographic is you've got some fairly tech savvy folk there. They're fairly smart. They're used to technology. They're, by definition, a lot of them are natives rather than immigrants, other than perhaps a generation that isn't. They're used to remote working at that level. So I'm finding in the main they're doing well, even though the times are different and they are facing some different leadership challenges around how you deal with teams when you're not there physically, what you can do to try and amend that. I think the other thing is accountants are well placed because they do understand regulation. I mean, they're used to reading the law. They know how to read the regulations. They've had difficulty because, well, I know that the Institute has given some advice which isn't correct or said some things that aren't right. HMRC, I think, is traditionally can be a little indecisive about what they actually mean. But I think generally they're doing pretty well in terms of embracing the technology and embracing the situation. But I think they may have a bit of a thing coming around the corner called cash flow, which is going to come up and bash them. So at the moment, most of them are doing lots of additional work for clients. The good ones are doing some great work, but it is challenging. And as James said, it's uncertainty, which accountants do kind of struggle with.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you in a moment what you feel are the biggest challenges that your member firms are facing, but we're just talking about the response generally of the accounting profession. Steve, how have they shaped up from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with Derek. I think in general, I think the profession has responded very, very well. And you kind of think what they've had to do in a very short length of time. That I was talking to one of our prime global firms this morning, one of our French firms, which is quite a big firm, so they have over 1,000 staff, and they had to move them fully remote within 3 days, and they've achieved that actually very, very successfully. And that we have a big firm in London with about 500 staff. They did the same in 2 days. And actually, they've been up and functioning and servicing their clients. And they're actually doing more client work than ever. Their productivity has actually increased during this time period. So you think that's quite an extraordinary challenge to face, and be able to keep all your teams, redirect many of the teams to the work that clients need, be able to manage them remotely and make sure that they feel confident during these times. I mean, all of that was hit. They've hit it, and they've overcome the barriers. So I think that's definitely a big positive. The areas that have been highlighted, I think, where there have been challenges is really what James was saying. Clearly, there's a huge degree of uncertainty. And I know we're going to talk about challenges in a moment, but even on that area, I do think they have raised their game. So now the partners are meeting much more regularly, looking at productivity. They're anticipating what's going to happen in the future. Yes, they're looking at cash flow. I was talking to one firm this morning, which is already starting to sort of cluster their clients into what do they think is going to happen in the coming months, depending on their industry sector, and what's their response as a firm to strategically support them. That's something they wouldn't have been doing before. So the fact that they're actually changing the way they're running the practices, I think, is very encouraging as well for the future.
Yeah. Martin, have the accounting profession stepped up as a whole in your view?
Not as a whole, but there is certainly some very, very encouraging signs. I've seen a 4-stage response to COVID from the profession at large. The first was to get their own house in order, as you would expect any organisation to do. in terms of cash flow, deciding who to furlough, who not to furlough. The second stage was to firefight client inquiries until it started dawning on everyone that the more proactivity you put into your communications, the less incoming calls you got to field. And so that was the second stage. Third stage was then get the team into remote locations, make sure the IT is secure, as Steve was outlining. And then stage 4, which I've only seen less than 10% respond to, but I'm hearing many other stories about that are much better percentages than that, are firms who have then taken a systematic approach to reaching out to their clients proactively. And they have gone with most vulnerable businesses first, most vulnerable to a cash flow downturn, and then grade A businesses second, and everybody else third, and gone out proactively and said, "Hiya, you all right? Can we help? You okay?" And have also gone beyond the call here, and this is where I think the real encouraging element is, and dipped into personal financial issues and talked about personal budgeting and keeping the lights on, the food, transportation, utilities, and mortgage sort of things. So I'm very, very encouraged by firms who have done that, and I've seen a lot of evidence of that. COVID hubs being established on websites very quickly, videos being put out on social media, not just to the client base, but to any other businesses that may not be being served by their existing firms as well. Yeah. So I do see a lot of positivity there. But as putting on the hat of author speaker, I've been in the company of the gurus all these years who talked about the importance of proactive advisory, and it's taken a global pandemic for us to get around to it.
Yeah. James, you've seen the profession face some crisis over the years. Anything like this?
No, not at all. But I think there are some real positives, and just emphasising or picking up what James said, what this has done is to force people to reach a position they've been talking about for years. If you take remote working as one example, we've been talking about that for years. And I heard a wonderful story about a webinar amongst a firm, and the young managing partner, recently appointed, late 30s, said, "Well, that's good. We've proved we can do it. We really are going to have to rethink our business model moving forward." And the chairman of the firm, grey-haired old man, said, "Over my dead body." And that, I think, is going to be a very interesting thing. There's going to be a real culture shift. And I think the successful firms are not those who have just responded and firefighted and so on, which you would expect them to do. It's not people who are just in the crisis management phase. It's the people who today are thinking about what the new normal is going to be in 6 months' time. And I think there are still too many people worrying about today and not planning for the future.
Yeah. 100%.
The other point, just to pick up a point that Derek made, and that is cash flow. I've heard a lot of people sounding, if I'm honest, fairly smug. Well, our firms are very busy. We're doing all this work. We're talking to all these firms. We're being very proactive, and we're very busy. And certainly if you're looking at a network with smaller firms, who is it that is getting all this advice? They're probably the weaker clients. And there is a huge difference between doing work and getting paid for it.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see a significant problem in the not too distant future. I mean, Derek made the point, and he's right. The profession is slightly ahead of the high street. You do the work, you don't expect to get paid for 60 days or 90 days or whatever it is. So you've got cash coming in today or last month from work done a couple of months ago. But the problem is going to come June, July, when you're waiting to get paid for the work that you're terribly proud about, how busy you are when everybody else is sitting at home not doing anything. You've done all this remote working, all these chargeable hours, but you're not going to get paid for them. And I think there's a degree of naivety there.
Yeah, and we're starting to dip into the challenges that firms are facing right now. Derek, from your member firms, what kind of challenges are coming up?
Well, I think in the short term, it's survival, to be honest, because I think everybody's in such an unprecedented position on this. Thankfully, we don't have too many what I would call boutique firms within the group, because I think boutique firms, particularly at the moment, if you specialise in M&A, corporate finance, forget it. You've got major problems because your market has gone. But I think the other challenges are around things like those who certainly had succession or exit plans. They have now disappeared because market values have dropped. There's no question on that. Those who had retirement schedules have probably changed because of the whole movement in terms of pension values, etc. I think on the cash flow side, we've already mentioned that, I think savvy firms are quite used to working off-site. Where the problem comes is on the central functions, like billing. If you can deal with a transaction off-site, you can deal with a set of accounts off-site, you can deal with an audit off-site, you can deal with lots of stuff off-site. But when it comes to central systems, most of those are not as diverse.
Yeah.
They're difficult. I think they've also got problems ahead in terms of how they deal with a number of issues where their costs are going to change, and they're going to change in terms of things like home working is fine, but where does GDPR sit on that? When you're centrally controlled, it's fine. I was talking to a PI broker in the last couple of days. PI, I think, will go through the roof. Market has already hardened. You're now going to have off-site working, less control. You're now going to have files in transit, less control. He was actually saying to me, he's unlucky, he's trying to broke a firm who last year had about £10 million worth of cover, and it cost them 40 grand. This year, he can only get 5 million, and it's 100 grand.
Yeah.
Now, the firm does tax schemes, which has always been sort of an iffy place to go. But if that is the hardening on the market, there's going to be some costs there. And I think that, coupled with the cash flow issue, will be a problem. The diminution of client as well, where there's certain sectors I do not think will recover.
Yeah.
The good side, and it's less of a challenge, they've also got the challenge of how you get some of your partners to recognise that being hangdog because your firm's in trouble is not the way to lead a firm. I mean, there is a whole role model issue there that, we all get down and depressed. I've been there, I've done this, where you wake up in the morning, you have black days, but, you've got to, particularly if you're online, doing Zoom or Teams, you go in there looking as miserable as sin. You don't encourage your people. So I think there is a major challenge there. But so you've got those leadership parts, but I think you're also going to lose some of your team players and some of your key players. If I were a corporate finance partner in a firm now, what would I be thinking I'm going to do?
We're going to come on to leadership. It's a challenge in itself. Steve, I saw you brushing your chin a little bit there. There's lots going on, isn't there, by way of challenges for firms?
There are, and I'd probably just pick up what James said, really, in a way, that probably the biggest challenge is dealing with the uncertainty, because that gets at the heart of some of these issues, even around cash flow, because you have to decide firms have to decide whether they're going to do the work, not knowing if their clients are going to survive. So there's choices there. Sometimes the firm might say, well, actually, we're better off putting back on our staff base and focusing on a core and choosing the most reliable work we can, or do we take the risk and actually do all the work possible in the hope that these clients do get through this and they get access to the funding and they're able to survive. But you have to do that without any certainty really about what the end outcome is going to be at the end of it. So that's quite a tough call for firms to be able to make. So that's definitely one of the big challenges. And it's tempting just to do what's in front of you rather than having a bit of time to step back and say, actually, let's anticipate what the world could look like in a few months and where we want to end up. Because there's challenges around anticipating that there could be a spike in work that comes at the end of this. Partly because a lot of deadlines are being changed, and that'll all come back in terms of filing annual reports and doing all the normal compliance activity. But also you could see a spike as the economy does start to come back in some shape and form. So the firms don't want to be in a position where they can't do the work that's out there, either because they've lost staff or they just haven't got the efficiencies to be able to take on some of that work as well. So that leads to challenges and decisions about how to get in the best place for what is an uncertain future, but trying to make some scenarios and thinking ahead to try and be ready to take that.
Yeah.
Then there's a challenge as well. And we talked about, Derek was talking about kind of some of the leadership side. Some of the consistent feedback I get as well is that one of the immediate challenges at the moment is helping the younger members of the firms. So it's kind of the trainees Now, of course, there's risk the trainees' position. They may not be able to maintain some of their trainees, and that's a reality. But also, generally, the feedback is that the people struggling most with the remote working and the uncertainty are the least experienced, and they're not getting quite the guidance and support they would have if they had been in an in-person, face-to-face environment. So that's a stretch on leadership skills as well, keeping that sort of next generation motivated, which will require a new mindset in recognizing the type of environment they're going to want to work in the future.
Very good. James Hickey, I know you're dying to jump in here. What challenges do you see firms facing?
I think, and it's been really interesting to hear those sort of very much sort of firm-based ones, but I think if we take a step back and sort of look at the client looking into the profession, I think one of the key things is just going to be relevance. You know, how do these firms remain relevant in what will be a very different world? And it's, yeah, I suppose one of the worrying factors that I saw in the last 6 months attending a lot of sort of external accounting conferences is how little the word client was mentioned anytime in those conferences. And, you know, with relevance also comes reputation. And if you look at what's happening with a lot of the larger firms, they're furloughing staff. They're really having to firefight in some situations there. And you know, I think there are going to be scenarios a little bit like general business during the financial crisis, where CEOs and businesses in general got away with actually being held to account for the poor decisions made. And I think that the accounting profession has been through a period, and this is maybe an overly generalized point, but it's been a good market, and even poor management has meant a lot of firms have been able to grow, and growth is not necessarily the right growth. It's not sustainable growth, and so you have a lot of firms sitting there. And again, I think it's not just firms. I think it's the accounting networks and associations, both just on the accounting, but also on the legal. I think there's going to be some really big questions asked about what is their relevance, what are they trying to do. And is that actually what the end user is wanting? Because I think their needs are going to change. And I think, again, we've talked about the big challenge is the cash. Cash is king. And certainly what I'm hearing is come June, as I think James mentioned earlier on, that's where the crunch is really going to come. And I do think that certainly a lot of what I'm seeing and hearing and reading, a lot of firms are still at that level of thinking of, well, reacting to what happened yesterday. And I saw some research out of the US, and it was quite interesting how far both the accounting and legal profession is lagging behind where it comes to where are they investing their time. They're still investing their time at firefighting, whereas other professional services are already in the environment because they've made that jump to remote. They've made that jump to really incorporating technology. They're at that, what they're looking at now is developing new business streams. So they are already fighting. And don't get me wrong, some accounting firms are there and they're doing it. I think the other issue and other challenge you've got is, again, the drive of the profession for certainly the last 3, 4, 5 years is that move away from traditional to advisory. Well, which section of the business has fallen off the planet? It's the advisory. So those firms that are really pushed, they are going to really be struggling now. And I was talking to a firm this morning, and they said, well, ultimately 60% of our business still remains the basics of accounting. So they feel fairly comfortable. But again, I think there's a lot of naivety, as James mentioned earlier on. Just because you've done the work doesn't mean you're going to get paid for it. Yeah. And that's going to be a huge challenge moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. James Mendelssohn, anything you would add to that in terms of the challenges firms are facing?
Well, I think, I can't believe how much I'm agreeing with James Hickey, actually.
It's always a first. It's always good to go before you as well.
But he's right. And I think that there are some firms that are working well with their clients. I think, Martin, you made the point. Some are doing very well, but an awful not. And I think that what we're going to see is firms needing to look very, very carefully at where they are and where they're going. And some have, more by luck than judgment perhaps, a service profile that is going to make them a little bit more resilient than others. But I was talking to one firm that was said they were modeling now for 20 to 25% of their clients not being around in 12 months' time.
Goodness.
Now, that is a huge chunk. Arguably, they would be possibly the smaller clients. So that's necessarily the same proportion of fees. And I think, my involvement is more with networks and associations than clients. But I think there are many parallels between the networks treating their member firms as clients, as the member firms themselves dealing with their clients. And I think that some of the firms within networks are going to consider very carefully how they move forward. And I think networks that today are feeling that they should be all right, maybe need to think quite carefully. And they need to be thinking, we are going to be running a very different organization in 12 months' time. We're going to have less members. I don't think there's any question about that. Recruitment of members has fallen off. It just doesn't exist anymore. Maybe a little bit, but essentially that has dried up. We're going to see fewer firms. We're going to see a very different attitude towards traveling, towards conferences. I mean, when I joined MSI 20 years ago, somebody said to me, why are you doing all this traveling? Why don't you do it by video conferencing? And I said, well, there's real value in face-to-face meetings. And there is. There's no question about the value. And, you're looking at the new generation of managing partners, the new generation of people who are coming at a senior level to these meetings, and they are much more aware of their carbon footprint. They are much more aware of the perception caused by them being away, by traveling and so on. Now, I would still argue there is real value in face-to-face meetings, but I think we're going to see much less of that. Where it's going to be treated much more critically. How was the time spent? What did you do? What did you get out of it? Who did you talk to? And people who say to me, well, so long as we can get over the next 6 months, we'll be fine, are living in cloud cuckoo land.
Yeah. We're going to be looking at what the new world might shape up like shortly. But Martin, final thoughts on the challenges the profession is facing right now?
Just like to revisit James H's point on cash and about being paid. I can only speak now about the sort of cohort that I have access to. But the big wobble was April 1st. Are the direct debits going to come through? Because getting paid for the work assumes we don't have it built into a variable direct debit every month. And out of 30-something firms that I was privy to, 2 direct debits bounced or failed to collect. The rest went through. And this work that is being done at this point, this additional work or this proactive work, is being built into a variable direct debit amount. And therefore, the next acid test is 1st of May. What happens 1st of May? Does the payments come in? And the view of the sort of partners as a whole, if I was to make a summary of them, is that the more times that goes okay, the more they're going to be okay, because they are getting paid. And the position that they're taking is, we are paying our commercial suppliers. We expect you, the clients, to pay us. Because we're doing the work, we're establishing the debt via the invoice, therefore we should be paid. And that's the approach I would expect, any forward-thinking practice to take. And so far, from the limited sample that I'm reporting on, it's happening.
Mm-hmm. What have we learned most, gentlemen, about the way accounting firms are led? Because this is the time for strong leadership from all quarters of the profession, not just in the firms. James Mendelssohn, let me come to you first on this, and we'll change the order just a little bit so that James Hickey can go after you this time. Are we seeing good examples of leadership, James, or has the firms fallen short?
I think superficially, we're seeing good leadership because people have responded. They got their staff working from home. They got in touch with clients. They've changed websites and provided different information and so on. So on the face of it, it looks good. But what we don't really know, what I don't know, is how much is going on behind the scenes. Because, we can do all the obvious things and get people working from home and maintain links with clients. But to me, good leadership today is already having started the planning for the new tomorrow.
Mm.
And we don't know that because that's not newsworthy. That's not out in the public domain unless you're actually talking to firms on a day-to-day basis. I just don't know. But to me, that would be the acid test. If I rang up a firm tomorrow and said, you know, how are you coping? What are you doing? If the managing partner said to me, oh, we've done very well. We've got all our staff working at home within 3 days. And we've been in touch with all our clients. And our website is telling you all about what grants you can claim and this, that, and the other. I would be seriously unimpressed. I might have been quite impressed a month ago. But if they told me that today, I would be seriously unimpressed. What worries me is that I suspect that quite a high proportion of managing partners would say exactly that to me.
Yeah. Steve, good leadership, or have we fallen short?
I think James, where you described it there is a good way to think about it. I think the immediate leadership shown around crisis management has actually been exceptionally strong, and there's almost heroic examples I can think of, you know, of managing partners going into the offices, taking on the roles of reception so they can go back to their family, you know, doing everything possible to protect their teams through all of this. And also very sort of value-driven approach where, you know, the firms are very much trying to both look after their own team as well as look after their clients. And I think it was Martin mentioning this earlier about a real focus on kind of giving solutions to their clients and being accessible, so that the partners being there to actually talk through real business issues in the way that we've all been saying is important to the future. So all of that has been happening, and that's leadership on many fronts. The other thing that's been happening as well is you see the firms are very, if you like, in a way, very generous really in going out there publicly to try and support businesses very widely. So if you look on social media, you'll see for all of our firms, they're out there giving general advice and guidance. Now, of course, there can be long-term benefits around that. You know, people remember that help, but they're doing it genuinely because they're trying to be helpful and trying to support people. But then in terms of that leadership of, okay, you know, some of that should be, they've got good teams in the firms, even small practices have got very good people. For the managing partners and the people leading those firms, some of that they need to step back from now and say, well, actually, that's all in place. Now let's look ahead and start thinking about where the opportunities will be in the future and how do we build practices which are ready to take that. I think that's more patchy, where you're seeing that happen, but it's happening more than it's happened before, because in a way they have to think about their survival. So I'm certainly, when I'm talking to firms, they're having much more regular partner meetings. They're looking at decisions around what do they do about real estate. You know, how will people want to work in the future? How they're more engaged with their teams than ever before because they're having more regular meetings. So they're more aware of productivity, more efficiency around how they actually manage their whole sort of client service offering. Project management, looking at resourcing, trying to think where they are going to need more capability in the future, and really sweating their digital assets. You know, that's really coming through as a major area. So those are all sort of promising signs, but it probably has to go a little step forward now to kind of think a bit about those scenarios and being a bit more strategic in their thinking as well.
Yeah. Martin, I've heard you quote Warren Buffett's famous phrase about it's only when the tide goes out that you can see who's been swimming naked. And some leaders have been exposed, haven't they? They've got the priorities wrong.
No one size fits all on this one, Rob, for me. To give extreme examples, some firms have thrown up the shutters, no question about it. One firm has gone out of business already. Notable award-winning firm has gone out of business already and decided to close down. That's one side of the argument, and it has shown up how many firms are not operating with cash reserves, for sure, and how many partners are treating their firms as cash machines. Yes, there's certainly evidence of that. But from a leadership perspective, on the other side, the more positive side of the coin, there's been some incredible, I think Stephen mentioned heroic examples, and I'm thinking of one in particular. I was made aware of a firm whose client, when this all hit, it was the final straw in a number of broken straws, and they chose to take their own life. And the firm has been involved in actually counselling, in as much as they are able to do so, the family of that business owner and make sure their affairs are in order. which is, that's above and beyond. If anything, above and beyond the call. There's above and beyond the call. On a much less dramatic footing, a firm just 8 miles down the road from where I'm sat, has moved their stuff remotely, and one of their senior managers, without being asked, stepped up and started managing the team remotely, including workloads and assigning various projects and keeping track of it all and keeping the team accountable. And that's a senior manager who stepped up. And in my time, I've heard keynotes telling me that leadership starts at the top, starts at the bottom, and starts in the middle. And I think what I've seen is that it's throughout the firm. We see senior managers stepping up. We see managing partners stepping up. We see audit partners who don't generally talk to tax partners starting to talk to each other about the client's well-being and coming together. So I have seen a number of positives and a number of negatives, and therefore I can't say that one size fits all on this one.
Yeah. James Hickey, have you been happy with the leadership portrayed so far?
Well, I'm not that he said it's already. I agree with James on this one. But and again, Martin's commentary as well. I hear that, but I sit here going, well, they should have been doing that anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Just because we're in a crisis doesn't mean you start popping champagne corks because a managing partner does something. They should have been doing this. So they've been pushed into this environment, and I think it's almost too dangerous to say, is the profession leading itself correctly? That's not going to come for another 12 to 18 months. We can only really truly answer that retrospectively once we really see. But I think, again, going back to my point about Martin, people are being pushed to actually be true leaders now. And hopefully, again, another positive from this, because do you know what? They're going to have to keep on doing this because they're going to lose staff left, right. Forget any debate about, woe betide millennials or all this or all that about staff retention. This is going to be what transforms the profession, and thank goodness, because it needed transformation in general. And yes, I totally agree, Martin. There are some firms out there that just get it right, and they are brilliant. And they need to be celebrated, and they will be seen as the benchmarks to look at and go, that's what we want to be doing. That's what we should have been doing. Now's the time for, as James rightly said, just to keep on saying, well, look, we got through this. Well, that's firefighting. That's not leadership. Yeah. That's just happened, and they've had to do it. It's how do they embrace these changes, and how do they really look? And already talking to firms, going, well, it's quite lucky. In the next 12 months, we've got our offices up for grabs again in terms of negotiation. What do we do now? Can we halve the size? Can we change completely the way we work? Can we? And I think I don't think. Again, I've been saying this for a while. I don't think there's been a more interesting and more exciting time to be in the profession. But now people have to stand up and really look at it and really say, look, it's going to be painful. And repercussions of this are going to be going on for 18, 24, even longer months, because a lot of what's the money coming into the market, that's not giveaways. Tax is going to go up. Debts are going to have to be repaid. So business is going to hurt. And that hurt is going to be passed on to the members and ultimately on to the networks that support those members. So our lives have changed, and we've now got to be sitting down and going, what does tomorrow look like? And yes, there's a little bit of, licking the finger and seeing which way the wind blows. But that's where good leaders are now, is really looking at that, what is relevant, and how can we make sure that we truly remain relevant to our clients.
Mm-hmm. Very good points there. Derek Smith, final word for you on leadership in the profession. Are you happy? Are you less than impressed?
I think I'm less pessimistic than the other folk on the panel in terms of where the profession is in terms of leadership. Generally, I think I've seen some very good examples of leadership in very difficult times. And I think we've got to recognise that for everybody, we're just into new territory on a lot of this stuff. Mm. I mean, just by way of example, I was having a conversation such as this yesterday with somebody who was at home also. Suddenly there was a scream from nowhere. 1.5-year-old child had fallen over, smashed their nose. The conversation finished. Now, you don't get that happening in an office a lot of the time. So I think we're into sort of new paradigms, as it were. I think that I've already mentioned the role model part. I think that it's important for folk to, or for leaders to recognise, and it's a real challenge, that circumstances when people are working from home can be very different from circumstances when they're in the office. There's a whole bunch of things that are different influences that have that bearing. And I think it's also going to be, or it's already a real challenge in terms of how these firms think strategically. I mean, it was interesting, the discussion about whether you're into recurring or compliance style work or more boutique style work, because at the moment the boutiques are in terrible trouble.
Yeah,
they're all down the tubes. I think the other part is, I hope that the leaders recognize there is a huge opportunity, because I think although they may be losing clients, what they would perceive potentially as one of their major adversaries, being the low-cost unqualified providers, they have an opportunity to demonstrate that they are so much better than them. Because the low-cost providers won't be able to handle this stuff at all. They're going to lose most of their clients.
Yeah. Well, we've got time for a couple more questions. Let's look ahead a little bit now. And I'll start with you, Steve, if I may, on this one. Coming out of this, are we going to see a new kind of accounting firm? We've already said that leadership is going to have to step up. Is there going to be a new normal, or do you think things are going to go back to the way they were?
We have covered this, I think, in some of the discussions. I don't think it can go back to the way it was, in a way, because there were trends hitting the accountancy profession, which were hitting business, obviously business, and more widely around technologies, ways people want to work, do business. You know, the reach of obviously digital and virtual. All of those have effectively accelerated, I think, probably between 3 to 5 years quicker than if this hadn't have happened. So they don't go away. So you know, for the accounting firms now, they are going to have to think very seriously about how they produce value. You know, they're going to have to very much focus much more on that consultative-based approach to understand and see things from their client's perspective. They're going to have to be a lot more agile, because this has taught us that the world can change very quickly. They're going to have to be run in different way, the firms, as well. I think that's one of the things which has come out of this, that the way practices are managed. You know, particularly in Europe, actually, the kind of fairly traditional style of a bunch of managing partners getting together and trying to make some decisions, you know, when their actual expertise is mainly technical. But you can't operate like that in this environment, because you have to make quick decisions, you have to be strategic, you know, you have to organize your resources and know who your clients are going to be and have your value proposition strong. You have to operate in a modern way in a digital environment, using marketing in the right way as well, using data in the right way. So all of those things, there's been steps towards that during this crisis, because it's almost had to happen. And some firms are better placed to do that already. But then what's effectively happened, I think, is for those who get through this, and unfortunately there'll be some who don't, for those who do get through this, they've effectively accelerated, and they're going to start catching up with some of those firms which were already a little bit ahead. So for now, that those firms are going to have to make a step forward as well. So, you know, for all of the profession and all of the firms, they are going to have to operate much more differently in this market.
Yeah. James Hickey, we're going to see a new kind of accounting firm. Are we seeing a new normal as far as you're concerned?
I hope we do. We should see a different one. I think the reality is that if I was a betting man, I'm not sure necessarily in general we will. I think we've already touched on the fact that those firms that get it, that see it, will have the opportunity to get much better visibility and reputation in the marketplace.
And relevance, as you said. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. as relevance. And similarly, you know, we've talked about the fact that, you know, there are going to be accounting firms that don't make it through this. There are going to be networks that don't make it through this. You know, and the whole deliverable has to change. You know, if I can just take a step maybe to the network level, I think for far too long networks have survived on pure goodwill, and survived on very few people within the firm really seeing value, and that is going to change. And then cascading it down, clients are really going to question, what value do you bring to me? What added value do I get from this relationship? And if a firm, if a network can't answer that, rightly, they shouldn't be in business, and they will struggle. So should we see a difference? 100% we should. Will we see a difference? maybe 60, 70%.
Mm. James Mendelssohn, will this be the watershed the profession needs to shape up and be fit for purpose?
No, it won't be a watershed. I think what you've seen in the profession for as long as any of us have been involved is evolution. You know, we all remember the big 8, and now they're the big 4, and it's just evolution. And I think Steve made the point that what you're actually seeing is 3 or 5 years down the path is actually going to happen much more quickly. So we're going to see evolution, and James is right. I think there are too many networks. I've said that for 3 or 4 years. We've seen a couple of mergers over the last 12 months. All of a sudden, people are going to be thinking very carefully, because some are in a strong position. They're good. They're well funded. There's an opportunity. There are others that are weak, and they may not appear weak, but you know, under the surface they're weak because they're not providing the right level of service. They rely on too much on goodwill. There are a number of groups that, for example, send out their invoices in June, end of June. And the cash situation then, you know, most networks do it at the end of December. Well, if they're well run, they'll have got their cash in January and February. And before it really hit, they'll have got most of their cash in. But I'm very glad that I'm not running a network that is about to send its invoices out in a couple of months. Mm-hmm. Because they're going to, you know, if you've got small members of that network, you're going to be struggling.
Yeah.
But I've also been talking to a network that is saying, actually, we are beginning to do some modeling based on sending out our invoices in December. Because where are we going to be? Nobody knows where we're going to be. But what we do know is that the thinking will be different. Cash will be king. Discretionary spend will be absolutely under the microscope. And so I don't think that this crisis has created an overnight change. What I think it's done is to accelerate evolution that was having to happen, because the world is changing. There is no scope for underperforming networks, firms, or client businesses. Yeah. And what we've done now is get to a situation where underperformers are going to be under the spotlight, and that's a shame for them. But it's also a real opportunity for strong businesses, because, you know, one can talk about the market evaporating, but there are still going to be networks, there are still going to be firms, there are still going to be businesses, there are still going to be consumers needing various goods and services. And what you're going to see is a realignment where the strong prosper and the weak appear. And ultimately, that has got to be good news for the profession, for businesses, and for the consumers. So every cloud has a silver lining. Yeah.
Thank you, James. Derek, thoughts from you? A new accounting landscape or more of the same?
Well, I think it's interesting just to say, James mentioned about evolution. It's interesting if you actually look at it, because the big 8 to the big 4, the big 8 has 72% of the market within the UK. The big 4 have 72% of the market in the UK. It hasn't changed. And ironically, politically, I think we may go from a big 4 to a big 12 or whatever, if they decide to break it all down. I think the key is probably the term that James used, James Hickey, which is about relationship. And I think that the firms who will do well are those who realize it's not about transactions, it's about relationships. And they're the ones that, at the moment, that I'm dealing with, who are doing incredibly well. Not many of them are furloughing. They're not feeling the need for that. They've still got the work. I think there will be a new model, but the model will be those who have just not been on the bus at all. The bus isn't going to be there for them. Yeah. I think for a lot of the firms, they will, if they continue, I still believe there's a huge scope for the medium-sized firms, even the smaller firms. As to networks, I think networks, it depends what they are. If they are looking at global work, I think there is a problem. And I think if you do not have some form of equity bind, which is why I personally like the Mendelssohn model, it's very difficult to get people to buy into it. Just in terms of the billing, we bill monthly, and we always will, and we haven't seen a drop-off in terms of those who are paying the monthly fees.
Sure.
We have given a honeymoon, but that's a different issue.
Thank you.
So I think I'm quite optimistic that people will learn from this experience.
Let's hope they will. Martin, I know you're suspicious of the new normal, but surely things must change.
Some change, yeah, but drastic change, not yet. The reason I'm skeptical of a new normal is because we've only been locked down for a month. It's only been a month, you know, and we had a world war that lasted just shy of 5 years. That's what changed things, you know, and that was a 5-year lockdown. Try that, you know, this has been a month. And if we remember, Paul, and James Hickey made the point, do you remember pre-COVID? Yeah, I remember pre-COVID. I remember technology companies coming after low-end compliance work. And I don't think they've stopped doing that this whole time, removing human intervention as much as possible from compliance work. So I think firms need to be aware of that. That's an ever-present danger. I don't think that's gone away. I think the longer lockdown continues, especially the threat of a second wave, I think the longer it goes on, the more we could see a new normal. But were the government in the UK to release lockdown restrictions after this next 3-week review, I think we'll go back to type. And I think the reason we'll go back to type is because the profession has a recurring fee business model where it gets paid for not doing much for most of the year. And that brings in a degree of anesthetic to real business issues. And what I think from the challenge is that the clients are now seeing firms being empathetic and saying, you care about us now, you care about whether we sink or swim now. You know, and when we go back to a normal, let's see if the firms still care or not about what they're going through. And when you've got a recurring fee model, you don't have to hunt and kill each month as your clients do. You don't have to sell to pay make the payroll, you know, as the clients do. And so there isn't that same empathetic bond between accountant and client. So I think that's the litmus test, is what happens to the proactive behaviours post-COVID. If they are retained, then I think we're going to see a tremendous uptick for the profession. If we revert to type, then I agree completely with James Mendelssohn's comments of the strong will survive.
Sure. Well, listen, this has been fascinating, gentlemen. We're coming to the top of the hour. I'm going to ask you for closing remarks and ask you to just be really brief and answer the question, what's next for the remainder of 2020 for the accountants and the firms that they serve? And James Hickey, can I come to you first? Just wrap things up for us. What are your closing thoughts?
My closing thoughts on this are number one, I think that I look at the current situation with the 3 C's, the key things that firms need to do. Number one, it's cash flow. You need to make sure your cash flow there. Number two, it's communication, both internal communication and communication to the marketplace. And just, you know, and it's also the listening. And that's really key, is listening to what's happening within the firm, listening to what's happening to the clients. And the third and final bit is just collective ownership. You know, this is not just something for one person to be, you know, the managing partner to be. People need to jump on board. You know, and if you have that collective ownership, it'll help on all elements of the business, the practice, right down to the well-being of the team. You know, we hear all of the things going on, you know, with remote working. You know, individuals need to take responsibility, and it's not down to the few; it's down to everyone. I hope that this is going to be transformational. I do believe it will be evolutional. And we'll just see where it goes. But I do still think for the profession, this is an opportunity that they really should not miss.
Certainly encouraging. Some words of hope in there. James Mendelssohn, any words of hope from you for the remainder of the year?
Absolutely. I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I don't know how long we're going to be in lockdown, but it won't be forever. And coming back, the strong will survive and get better. It will really accelerate all the things that those of us who are involved in the professions but not practicing in the professions have been so frustrated about for so long. It's fantastic that this bomb has been put under the profession, and you know, sometimes it's actually rather frustrating that weak, poorly managed firms survive as an outsider looking in. And I really hope that good firms will prosper. And I hope that some of the weak firms will take the opportunity to look at themselves and actually transform themselves. And if they can, fantastic. And if they can't, they'll drop out of the equation. But I think there's a real opportunity, and we need to grab it and accept that life has got to change and jump on that bandwagon.
Thank you. Derek, closing thoughts from you, sir.
I remain reasonably optimistic in what I think are going to be very challenging times. People, I think, are going to have to get used to the fact that there will be a profit dip. I just hope that they learn much about dealing with people, be it either their clients or their team, and they realise that the key to this is the principles that they employ within their organisations to make sure that they do survive.
Yeah, thank you very much. Steve Heathcote, final thoughts from you, words of encouragement maybe?
No, absolutely. I think the accounting profession is needed more than ever before. So I think what we need to keep really stressed now, let's build on some of the opportunities here. So the trusted advisor position has been strengthened more than ever. So where can we take that? We're seeing professionals and firms being much more open to learning and doing new things that they probably said weren't possible, or some people had said not possible just 6 weeks ago, they're now doing. So that mindset of being able to learn, I think, is very important to keep building on. And actually collaboration, I think we're all seeing this across our associations and networks. There's actually more interaction. It's not social distancing. There's more social connections going on than ever, and firms are getting together and sharing ideas and knowledge, and they're open to change, and they're going to have to be, because they have to change, and therefore they can learn from each other. So actually the reason to join an association or network is stronger than ever before. So let's try and make that happen and really try and strengthen the accounting profession, including all of us working together as well.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you. Martin Bissett, final thoughts from you, sir?
I would agree with Steve's point. Huge opportunities for the proactively minded, for those who behave proactively. Tremendous opportunities coming their way soon. I know a number of firms who are seeing acquisitions are going to be a lot cheaper, perhaps, than they were previously, and those who have cash reserves are preparing for a Q3 splash of acquisition and M&A activity. For the rest of the year, I think the one elephant in the room that I don't think we've discussed yet is that this home working from home, where an 8 to 10 hour office day has become a 4-hour working from home day, with productivity and quality of work as good as, if not better, than in the office, is making a mockery of traditional capacity calculations. And what was the client billed for all this time? So for time-based firms who bill on time on the hourly billing model, I think there's a challenge there as to what has the time been used for. And this, I know so many firms who've said, now we can't pop into the office for a chat with somebody, we're getting the work done a lot faster. That's a cultural shift that I think we need to keep our eye on. But overall, is this going to be a period of opportunity for the profession? Hugely.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, for your insights today, for your knowledge. It's been a really enlightening conversation and a debate. We'd love you to come back at some point and dig into some other further questions and get to know one another a little bit more in this new era of collaboration and relationship-based doing business together. Thank you so much. I'm going to hit the stop button right now. You are free to relax and breathe out. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob, for the opportunity.